Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at a story you might not have heard before. It's about the 613 88th Central Postal Directory Battalion. They were called the 6888. We're basing this deep dive on Tyler Perry's 2024 film, The 6888. And let me tell you, it's quite a story. We're talking about an all-black, all-female battalion during World War II, no less. And they faced a ton of racism and sexism while they were trying to complete what seemed like an impossible mission. They had to sort through a backlog of mail. Get this, a 2-year backlog, all by hand.
You know, it really is amazing how this story stayed hidden for so long, almost like it was buried on purpose. But to really understand how big of a deal their achievements were, we got to go back to World War II. Obviously, it was a huge global conflict, but it was also a time when racism and sexism were just a normal part of American society, even in the military.
Yeah, for sure. And so that's where the 688th come in, right? They had to deal with a problem that was both really important and really, really hard to solve.
Exactly. Think about it. Mountains and mountains of undelivered mail, warehouses full of it, all these letters and packages just waiting to connect soldiers to their families back home. This wasn't just junk mail. It was letters filled with everything. Hopes, fears, news from home, official notices, basically a lifeline to the world outside the war zone.
Wow. I can't even imagine. Okay, but I got to ask, the name Central Postal Directory Battalion is a bit of a mouthful, don't you think?
Huh? Yeah, it does sound kind of bureaucratic. But you know, their nickname, the 6888, that really says it all. It shows who they were as a unit, a force to be reckoned with. And it reminds us that they weren't just postal workers, they were soldiers on a mission.
That's a good point. And speaking of their mission, they ended up going to Europe right in the heart of the war.
They did, and they didn't exactly get a warm welcome. The film shows this racist commanding officer who wouldn't give them the support and resources they needed. It makes you wonder if someone was trying to sabotage them from the beginning.
Wow, so they were already facing an uphill battle right from the start. But they didn't give up, did they? Before we get into that, though, I want to meet some of these amazing women. Who are these heroes?
Oh, they definitely did not back down. Not at all. And Tyler Perry did an amazing job putting together a cast to portray these women. Leading the battalion is Captain Charity Adams, played by the incredible Kerry Washington. Captain Adams was a real trailblazer. She had to deal with all the normal challenges of the mission, but she also had to lead a battalion in a system that was basically designed to make them fail.
Right, because they were black and they were women.
Exactly.
And then there's Lieutenant Noel Campbell, played by Milana Jackson, another important leader. The film also introduces us to Lena, a young woman who joins the 6888 after something really tragic happens.
Ah, yeah. Lena's story. She's kind of a character who represents what a lot of the women in the unit went through, and she really brings that personal touch to the film. So she joins the 6 Downs at 88th after her childhood sweetheart Abram is killed, and her story ends up being woven into the bigger story of the mission.
That's powerful. So they arrive in Europe, ready to tackle this crazy amount of mail, and what happens? What do they find when they get there?
Well, it wasn't exactly a 5-star hotel. They're stuck in this freezing cold warehouse that's overrun with rats. You really get the feeling that someone was trying to set them up to fail on purpose.
Yeah.
And on top of all that, they're given this deadline, 6 months, to clear the entire backlog, which seems completely unrealistic given the conditions.
So let me get this straight. They're facing racism, they're facing sexism, they've got this incredibly difficult job, and they have this ticking clock hanging over their heads. It's hard to imagine how they could possibly succeed, but they did, right?
They did, and they did it in an incredible way.
Okay, now you got to tell me, how? Did they have some secret weapon, some super efficient sorting technique?
Well, it wasn't magic, but it was pretty close. They developed these innovative systems. They worked around the clock. They were really driven by their determination, and they really understood how important their work was. They know that every single letter, every package represented a connection to home. And they weren't going to let those connections fade away. No,
90 days.
Yeah.
That's all it took them to clear the backlog.
Yeah.
They totally blew everyone's expectations out of the water. I'm starting to see why their motto was no mail, low morale. But there's got to be more to this story than just sorting letters.
Right. You're absolutely right. There's another whole layer to it. The film doesn't just focus on the logistics of the mission. It also explores the human side of things, the themes of resilience, sisterhood, and how powerful love can be.
It's like that scene where Lena's going through all the mail, and she finds Abram's final letter. It's a moment that really shows you the personal cost of war.
Exactly. It reminds us that their work was about so much more than just delivering mail. They were delivering hope, closure, sometimes even heartbreak. Every single piece of mail held a piece of someone's life, a piece of their story. And the 6888 treated each one with so much care and respect. Yeah, it really is amazing when you think about it, that they did all of this while dealing with a system that was constantly working against them.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how strong and resilient these women were. But their story isn't just about overcoming personal obstacles, right? I mean, the 6888 actually had a big impact on the entire war effort.
Oh, absolutely. We've talked about how important it was for morale. But efficient mail delivery was also crucial for military operations in general. I mean, orders, notifications, important communications, all that stuff, it all relied on the postal system working properly.
So in a way, the 6888 were like unsung heroes on like multiple levels.
Yeah.
They weren't just delivering letters, they were helping to keep the entire war machine running.
You could say that. Their contribution was huge, absolutely essential. And yet, even after all that, when they came back home, they basically faced more of the same discrimination, disrespect. They weren't given the same benefits or recognition as their white counterparts.
That's just heartbreaking, honestly. To risk your life for your country and then be treated like a second-class citizen when you come home. It's like their fight for equality didn't end when they left the battlefield.
Unfortunately, no, it didn't. It seems like their battle continued back in the States. The 6888, like so many other black veterans, had to keep fighting for basic human rights long after their service was over. It really shows you that the fight against prejudice was far from over.
Yeah, it's a really sobering thought. But even with all that, their story is still a powerful example of human resilience. It goes way beyond the battlefield. Their legacy has paved the way for so many others.
Oh, for sure. Think about all the black women they inspired, both in the military and outside of it. They were so brave and determined. And they helped to break down barriers and challenge all those deep-seated prejudices. They became these beacons, leading the way towards a more just and equal world.
That's what's so amazing about Tyler Perry's film, It's not just a history lesson. It's a call to action. It forces us to remember the sacrifices these women made, to honor their story, and to continue their fight for equality.
It's true. For so long, the 6888 were kind of pushed aside. Their contributions were almost forgotten. But with this film, their story is finally being told.
And it couldn't have come at a better time. With all the conversations happening about social justice these days, their story is so relevant. It reminds us that the fight for equality is far from over. It's something we all have to keep fighting for.
Definitely. And the film doesn't shy away from the hard stuff either, the realities of racism and sexism. It forces us to look at some uncomfortable truths about our past and our present. It's like a wake-up call, a challenge to do better.
Yeah, for sure. We can't just ignore these issues. We have to learn from what happened in the past. We have to acknowledge that the struggle is still going on. And we have to actively work towards a world that's more just and more equal.
Right, exactly. The 6888 story reminds us that progress isn't always a straight line. There are setbacks, but the fight for justice is something we always have to be paying attention to. It takes commitment and a willingness to challenge the way things are. And it's a fight we all need to be a part of in our own way.
So it's not enough to just sit back and admire their courage. We have to actually be inspired by their example and take action in our own lives.
I agree. It doesn't matter what your skills are or your talents or your resources. We all have something to bring to the table. We don't all have to lead protests or become politicians.
Right? But we can find ways to make a difference in our own communities, starting with education. We need to learn about the history of oppression and be aware of our own biases.
Yes, absolutely. We have to be willing to get out of our comfort zones, to challenge prejudice when we see it, and to use our privilege to help those who are less fortunate.
Maybe it's volunteering our time, or donating to organizations that are fighting for social justice, or even just having those tough conversations with our friends and family who might see things differently.
Absolutely. It's about remembering that change doesn't happen overnight. It's a long process, for sure. There will be times when it feels like we're not getting anywhere, but it's a fight worth fighting, and we don't have to fight alone.
The 6888 proved that. They faced all these crazy obstacles, but they never gave up hope. And they didn't win by themselves. It was their collective effort, their sisterhood, that made the impossible possible.
Their story is like a guiding light, reminding us that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can overcome anything.
Okay, so as we move into the final part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with something to think about.
What will you do to honor the 6888? How will you carry their torch forward?
It's really incredible to think about all the ways their actions had an impact. They didn't just affect the war effort or the people who got those letters. They became these symbols of hope and change that continue to inspire us even today.
That's right. And their impact is still being felt today. But for so long, almost nobody knew their story. It kind of makes you wonder how many other stories of courage and resilience are still out there waiting to be discovered.
It's like we're on a historical treasure hunt, uncovering these amazing hidden gems. And speaking of uncovering things, I know we promised to share some resources with our listeners. For those who want to learn more about the 6888.
Right, of course. Tyler Perry's film is a great place to start. It really brings their story to life. You can find it in some theaters, and it's also on Netflix.
Yeah, definitely put it on your watch list.
Yeah.
But what about those who want to go even deeper, like really dig into the history and the details?
Well, there are some amazing books out there, like 6888, Americans' Forgotten Black Women Heroes by Maureen Sullivan. It's a really well-researched account of the battalion, their mission, everything.
I remember reading that one. I was blown away by how detailed it was. Sullivan really gives you a feel for what it was like for those women facing all that prejudice and logistical craziness,
Yeah.
all while trying to maintain some sense of normalcy.
Yeah, it's a great book. And if you're more of a visual person, there's a documentary called The 6888, No Mail, Low Morale. It has interviews with some of the women who are actually in the battalion. They share their experiences firsthand. It's really powerful to hear their stories directly from them.
Oh, wow. I bet. To hear their voices, their perspectives on this incredible part of history.
It is. It really is. It's like a direct connection to the past. It reminds you that these weren't just names in a history book. They were real women who lived and laughed and loved and fought for a better world.
Their story really shows us that history is so much more than just dates and battles. It's about people and their experiences and their struggles. And speaking of fighting, the fight to give the 6888 the recognition they deserve isn't over yet.
You're right, it's not. There's a movement to award them the Congressional Gold Medal. That's the highest civilian honor that Congress can give. And people are working to create a national memorial to commemorate their service.
Yeah, wow. Just imagine a monument dedicated to these women, standing tall as a symbol of their courage and resilience. It's a really powerful thought. But even beyond those efforts, there's so much we can do to carry their legacy forward.
Absolutely. It starts with awareness. We need to educate ourselves and others about the history of racism and sexism. We can't just celebrate their accomplishments without recognizing the systems they were fighting against.
Right, we have to understand that their fight is still going on today. We see it in all the struggles for equality that are happening in so many different communities. And even though we might not be sorting through mountains of mail in a war zone, we can all find ways to contribute to a world that's more just and more equal.
I completely agree. We need to be aware of our own biases. We need to challenge prejudice whenever we see it. And we need to use our voices to support those who are still marginalized and silenced.
We need to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. We need to use our privilege to help lift up the voices of those who haven't been heard. And we need to remember that we're all connected. Our actions, no matter how small they seem, can have a ripple effect.
That's so true. Sometimes those ripples can turn into huge waves of change. The 6888 showed us that. They faced incredible obstacles, but they never gave up on their mission. And they never lost hope.
And in a way, their mission is being carried on through all of us. Every act of kindness, every time we challenge injustice, every effort we make to support those who are marginalized, it's all part of carrying their torch forward.
I love that. So to all our listeners out there, we want to leave you with one final thought. What will you do to honor the legacy of the 6888? How will you take their story and use it to create positive change in your life and in the world around you?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the incredible story of the 6888. Their courage, their resilience, and their unwavering commitment to justice are truly inspiring. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.